Have you been searching YouTube for tutorials on how to write a screenplay? And you keep finding these ones that go on about the format, not the actual writing process. Well, here's another one. I'm going to get this out of the way first, so that in future videos I can focus on the more creative aspects of actually writing a screenplay. Hi, I'm Phil Moore, and I make movies. Screenplays use a very specific format in the way they're formatted and presented, right down to the font that should be used. But first, in the beginning, films were made without a script. At best, they had what was called a scenario, an outline, and it was up to the director and the actors to improvise the story as they went. Now, Georges Méliès is often credited with devising the earliest form of a planned script, for films such as A Trip to the Moon from 1902. This developed into the master scene format, where the action of each scene was briefly outlined, not unlike a modern-day treatment. It looked something like this. Then, along came producer Thomas Ince, who effectively created the Hollywood movie factory approach to production. The movie studio. Scripts became more of a technical document, not just a description of the action, but a complete guide for each production, right down to the budget and the schedule. It was designed to help everyone involved in the production understand what film they were all working on. These were called continuity scripts. This was the origin of the modern screenplay, more as a technical document than a narrative story. And this form was used throughout the 30s and 40s, the golden years of Hollywood. Other countries, of course, developed their own formats for a photoplay script. But, thanks to the dominance of Hollywood pictures, the American form has become the international standard. A number of books were written to help guide budding film writers of the day. Among them was How to Write Photoplays, co-written by one of the industry's first screenwriters, Anita Loos. Yes, most writers and editors back in the day were women. By the 1960s, however, the system had changed. The studio system monopolies were broken up, and European cinema rose once more to become a powerful influence over how movies were made. The auteur filmmaker was born, and the writer was relegated to just writing the story and not be directing the film from the page. Scripts were now more of a starting point for a potential film, not an all-purpose production document. Here, the format we know today emerged, focusing on readability and story, rather than the technicalities of production. What is sometimes called a master scene script, or spec script, short for speculative. The format for screenplays has changed and adapted many times over the past 100 years. It is not set in stone. That said, it's been pretty consistent for the past 50 years or so. And doing anything radically different just makes you look like an amateur who doesn't even know how to format a script. There's just a few simple conventions you need to follow. They're not rules, because any rule can be broken if you have a good reason to do so. 1. Use a Courier typeface. This is a holdover from the old typewriter days, which has perversely remained part of the screenplay format. There are a few different versions of Courier available, and some screenwriting programs have their own particular flavour. Use whichever one looks best to you. You can use a different font sometimes, when writing lyrics into a script, or indicating a signpost, display, or some other textual graphic, where the visual difference in typeface helps convey what you want more readily than a lengthy description would. But only do this if it makes things clearer to the reader. Don't do it just to be clever or different. Also, traditionally on typewriters you could only have capitals or underline to emphasize a word. Nowadays we can use italics and bold. But again, only if it makes things clearer to the reader. 2. Traditionally all screenplays start with the words fade in full caps at the top left. Now you don't have to do this, especially if you don't want this film to start with a classic fade in, but it is a convention. 3. Each scene opens with a scene heading, or slug line. This describes the location and time of the scene that follows, and whether it is an interior or exterior scene. This slug line is in all caps, and some writers like to bold them as well, though this is breaking with convention. It follows this format, with interior or exterior, then a brief description of the location, dash, night or day. Note the dots and dashes, these are also important. In places where you might otherwise use an N dash or an M dash, traditionally you would use a double dash, because Courier is a monospaced font, and because typewriters didn't know what an M dash was. These days, some writers will use N and M dashes in their screenplays. It's up to you. Sometimes the location might come in two parts, like a master location and then a sub-location, separated by a dash. Sometimes you will see int ext combined. This suggests the location is both indoors and outdoors, such as a car, where we can see both the interior of the car and the outside world. For that, you might also add travelling to the end of the line. Sometimes the time of day is not just day or night, but dusk or dawn. And sometimes, if this scene is a direct continuation of the scene before it, you will see continuous or later here. You can also write flashback here, with back to present or end flashback when it's over. 4. Action is a description of what's happening, basically everything that's not dialogue. It's written in normal case, spanning the full width of the page. It can be as long or as short as you like, and can sometimes be several paragraphs long. It should also be in present tense. In screenplays, everything is happening now. If you have a lot of action, it's best to break this up into short sentences and paragraphs. Sometimes as short as a single word. Having lots of white space on the page is a good thing. There is nothing more daunting to a reader than large, wordy chunks of action. They tend to get skipped over. When you mention a character for the first time, capitalize their name. This tells the reader that this is a new character to the story. After this, you can use regular case whenever you refer to them. Likewise, whenever you mention a key prop or sound effect, capitalize it. This signals that this is an important story element. The key thing here, and this is not so much about formatting as it is about good screenwriting, is to write only what we can see or hear. But more on that in a later video. 5. Character names. When a character has dialogue, their name appears in all caps in the center of the page. You don't have to use their full name, especially if it's a long one. Just use their first name or surname or even a nickname, whatever makes the most sense. As long as it's consistent, both in dialogue and when referred to in action. That name is how the reader will identify the character. It's also a good idea where possible to avoid names that start with the same letter or have a similar sound. This helps avoid confusion for the reader. There can be some tricky situations when you don't want a character's name to be revealed just yet, or they end up changing names partway through your story. There is no easy fix for this, just do whatever makes the most sense for your story and is the least confusing for your reader. 6. Dialogue. Dialogue is in regular case, centered and indented on both sides so it stands out against the action. Generally, even if it's a big long speech, this is shown in a single chunk until someone else speaks or you interrupt them with some action. If the dialogue is voiceover, then you add a VO after the character's name. If the dialogue is off-screen, sometimes you will see an OS next to the character's name. If the dialogue is meant to be heard over a shot, before we cut to the speaker, this is called a prelap. Now this is usually done in the edit, not in the script. But if as writer you feel it's important to be shown that way, you can use prelap here. 7. Parentheticals. Sometimes under the character's name, you'll add a brief description in brackets for the dialogue that follows. This is a short note clarifying or suggesting how the dialogue should be said. Parentheticals should be avoided whenever possible. Only use them if there's a chance the line will be misinterpreted by the reader. For example, sarcastically, or if the line is to be directed at a specific person and you need to make that clear. Or, sometimes, off reaction, so we understand what has prompted the line. Avoid using parentheticals to tell an actor how to say the line or what they should be feeling or thinking. They'll just ignore it anyway. Now those 7 points are the main things to remember. There are some other smaller conventions such as transitions, like cut to, smash cut to, match cut. And these can be placed between scenes if you want to suggest how they are cut together. But these are usually best avoided. They're really the domain of the director and the editor. A good one to know, however, is intercut. This can be used when switching between two separate scenes, such as during a phone conversation. It avoids you having to constantly create new slug lines all the time. Likewise, subheaders suggest a new sub-scene within the same location, usually a few moments later or in some other part of the house. Another way to avoid too many slug lines. Montages can be marked with a begin montage and end montage, with the individual scenes or shots contained between them. If you want to suggest where and when opening titles appear, you can use the heading title. But again, if their timing isn't crucial to your story, this can be left up to the director and editor. Title can also be used for descriptive captions such as New York, 1932. It's also worth noting that you do include page numbers on your script, but do not include scene numbers. Even though your screenwriting software offers this, numbering scenes is important once your script goes into production, but for now, you can leave them off. Your screenwriting software will do most of this work for you. You don't have to worry about margins or indents. These programs are really just specialized word processors designed to make the formatting go away so you can just focus on writing. You may have also heard that each page of a screenplay equals 1 minute of screen time on average. This rarely turns out to be the case, but producers need some kind of benchmark to work off. The reason we still use this rather arcane format for screenplays is because we're used to it. Simple as that. To someone who reads a lot of screenplays, the formatting becomes invisible. They're used to it. If you change it, it sticks out. Now, that can be a good thing if you want it to stick out and be noticed. But it can also be a bad thing if it throws the reader out of the story just because you did something unorthodox. So follow the format, unless you have a really good reason to do something different. And before anyone asks, I know certain high-profile screenwriters break these formatting rules all the time. That's because they can, especially if it's a script they're going to also direct. So, unless you're Quentin Tarantino watching this right now, in which case, hi Quentin, call me. Follow the format. Now that said, I've added hyperlinks to song demos on SoundCloud for musical scripts. Sometimes adding a graphic image of a symbol or a map may be the quickest, clearest way to show what you mean. If so, do it. Film is, after all, a visual and oral medium, and we can now add those elements into a screenplay PDF easily. Just make sure when you break with convention, you do it with a purpose, and it's not just a gimmick. Be sure it makes the read clearer and more entertaining. And finally, as for which software you should use, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't. There are several good programs around that will do the job. They each have their pros and their cons. Try out the demos. Find the one that feels best for you. Personally, I use Fade In, but there are other good choices. The best writing software is the one that makes all this formatting stuff invisible, so you can just focus on the writing. Till next time, I'm Phil Moore. Chukas.